tune from the 20s called Honeysuckle. Thank you. And we're out of time here, and so we're going to get out of the way and let the real show begin. Thank you.
What an honor it is to introduce tonight's writer. It's our good fortune that Peter Everwine made his home here when he joined the English faculty at Fresno State in 1962. He is Professor Emeritus and has received numerous honors for his poetry, including the Lamont Poetry Prize, fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts and the Guggenheim Foundation, an American Academy of Arts and Letters Award in Literature, and a Senior Lecturer Fulbright Award. Peter Everwine is the author of 7 collections of poetry, including Collecting the Animals, From the Meadow, and Listening Long and Late, published by the University of Pittsburgh Press, with an 8th manuscript at his publisher now, and 4 books of poetry translations from the Hebrew and Aztec languages. He is famous in these parts, not just as a great poet, but also as a fine banjo player. Yeah. His music has fed his poetry in its lyricism, rhythms, and sometimes subject matter. Peter says, quote, "Music is always with us, from cradle to requiem. I was fortunate as a child to grow up listening to my grandmother's Victrola, an eclectic stash of records. I found much later the power of language in poetry. Both music and poetry come from similar urgencies and needs. I was even more fortunate that I could actually do both." Everwine is an acute observer of human behavior, where gesture is a language, and of nature. Giving this quality of attention to the world all of his life has resulted in a poetry of light. His poems are unflinching, and they reveal. His work floats on the page, often spare and simply spoken, and in its lightness is mobility, a moving in time between the present and the past of his childhood and other periods in his life, in poems that are rich in longing and love. His poems name the world, so that at least within the confines of the page, what he has seen, we see, and ineffably understand. He credits his experience of growing up among the woods and streams of Pennsylvania as a significant influence in his writing. In a recent conversation published on the Kenyon Review website, he says, quote, "I learned to hunt and fish both of which forced me to acquire a keen eye and ear, a sense of direction, humility and wonder before the power of the mysterious, the value of silence, a deep reverence for life and death, and the discipline of patience, all of which have been enormously useful to me in writing poems. The late U.S. Poet Laureate Philip Levine stated that Everwine's poems, quote, are like no other in our language. They possess the simplicity and clarity I find in the great Spanish poems, but in contemporary English and in the rhythms of our speech, that rhythm glorified. He presents us with poetry in which each moment is recorded, laid bare, and sanctified, which is to say, the poems possess the quality one finds only in the greatest poetry. And the poet Edward Hirsch writes, quote, there is something shining and pure, a radiant clarity, a luminous stillness at the heart of Peter Everwine's beautiful, mysterious, and necessary work. Please join me in welcoming the great and necessary poet, Peter Everwine.
That was a hell of a band, wasn't it? That was fun. Made me want to play banjo instead of read poetry. I want to thank Megan for her introduction and the staff of Respite by the River for inviting me here. How's that? Whoa! Okay. I forget where I am. I wanted to thank people who invited me. I want to thank you very much. And I want to thank that terrific band that had my toe tapping. Thank you, Barry, Terry, Megan. I'm going to read from some old work, from some recent work, mostly recent, I think. And the first poem I want to read is by way of thanking Barry and Terry and Megan for playing and having such a wonderful evening to play with in. So I'm going to read a poem about when I was about college age and getting really interested in country music. And I would go hear people like what you just heard and try to learn. And I never knew whether I loved music more or the roadhouses where they played. It was a kind of an equal thing. So I'm going to read this poem about learning to play banjo. It's called One for the Five String. There's a quote here from the great jazz tenor player, Lester Young, who was called Prez, and you'll hear it. One for the five string. A Saturday night outside town, full moon risen above the fields, their summer heat and fragrance drifting through the open doors of the roadhouse. Inside, I'm sitting in with Joe and the troubadours, a college kid trying to find the right notes on a pawn shop banjo. Joe plays fiddle, Jimmy the dwarf French harp, Wendy's on guitar. He's wearing the black leather shoes, the one with lightning bolts stitched along the sides, and the lightning bolt socks to match. By midnight, he's got his head thrown back, high singing heartbreak songs and honky-tonk over the clamor. The crowd looking for a good time now after the week's labor. Couples stepping in close, swaying off into the gleam and shadows of the bar lights. You have to tell a story, Prez said. Here's mine. A woman slow dancing alone by the bandstand smiled up at me, her damp face shining. Honey, she said, take these chains from my heart. Well, what did I know about women or the heart's wayward hesitations, dreaming of those melodies unheard I read about in books? Lady, I said, I've never even seen you before. Asshole, she said. I meant the song. I think this next poem probably needs no introduction. It's called The Day. We walked on the edge of the sea, the dog still young then, running ahead of us. Few people, gulls, a flock of pelicans circled beyond the swells, then closed their wings and dropped headlong into the dazzle of light and sea. You clapped your hands. The day grew brilliant. Later, we sat at a small table with wine and food that tasted of the sea. A perfect day, we said to one another, so that even when the day ended and the lights of houses among the hills came on like a scattering of embers, we watched it leave without regret. And that night, easing myself towards sleep, I thought how blindly we stumble ahead with such hope. A light flares briefly. Ah, happiness. Then we turn and go our way again. But happiness, too, goes on its way. And years from where we were, I lie awake in the dark, and suddenly it returns. That day by the sea, that happiness, though it is not the same happiness, not the same darkness. If you clap, then the next time I'll wonder why you did or didn't clap. And it'll be very disappointing if you don't. And you will hurt my feelings unnecessarily. So I would suggest that you wait and show your appreciation, if you will, by not throwing tomatoes and clapping. I'm going to read about a poem about a dog. Not a pet, a dog. Her name was Annie. And, you know, sometimes I wish I could name poems the way old tunes are named, because they're wonderful titles for poems. This is not that kind of title. But the dog was really enormously sweet, gentle, unless you were a squirrel or an intruder. Her name was Annie. She was actually owned by my longtime companion, Connie Lake. She loved us equally, I think. I like to believe it. So we commonly referred to Annie as our dog. Well, this is a poem about our dog, Annie, called We Were Running. We were running up the slope of a hill, that dog and I. An early winter rain beginning to fall, wind-driven and sharp. The clouds so black, the edges of the hills were etched and incandescent. That dog and I were running, the two of us apart and yet together. And even now, in the solitude of a quiet hour, the days and that dog long gone, I can follow those far-blown traces of unexpected joy and find my way back again, heart wild, lungs filling with the breath of winter, and that dog beside me, running headlong into the world. I warned you. Connie Lake, did you applaud for our Annie? I want to read a poem. There are poems that sometimes one is pretty grateful to have. And sometimes those poems start out to be one thing, and the poem demands its own way of going. It's like Barry says, you know, you start out and then you make up something. This is a poem where I learned what I knew but didn't really know. And it's called The Rag Rug. In our kitchen was a rag rug my mother bought for its bright mix of colors. It was my task on cleaning days to drape it over the line in the backyard, and with a tool shaped like a wing of a giant dragonfly, proceed to whack it until a cumulus of dust swirled overhead, earning my mother's approval. Cleaning, what she called redding up, was both industry and passion for her, while I, in my arrogance, thought it foolish and beneath my talents. The dust she chased from one corner fled to another, and then she too was dust. Now I live alone in a house time traded me house for house, until I learned grief also is a kind of clutter. Drive one grief from the door, two others knock, seeking a place within. And though too late, I ask for her forgiveness, who hated whatever tarnished or made dim the light and luster of common things. Lamp, glass vase, the figure in a photograph, wood grain of table, braiding in a rug. This rag rug I took from memory and put into a poem, that I might see it as before, dancing its tiny fires into the morning's early slant of light. Thank you. I have a great granddaughter. She had just a birthday about a week ago, 2 years old. My son and his wife are in the audience. Anyway, I wrote a poem for her. Her name is Ava, and this was pretty much after I met her for the first time, which was, she was not just born, she was grown up because she lives in Los Angeles. It's called For Ava in the Coming Days. Your first glimpse of me frightened you and made you cry. A stranger, scraggly beard and glasses, a slack and weather-beaten face. I can't blame you. Even I at times startle, catching myself in the bad light of a bathroom mirror. So recently arrived, you like 1 foot in the circle of familiars. I watch you at mealtime, mushing your food as if you knew the truth of living hand to mouth, slinging the heft and sweet muck of it with such delight it turns your tears to laughter. I might wish for you the gift already yours. May you hold this joy in mind and turn to it when you have grown, dear child, decorous and civil. You won't quit, will you? What? Jesus. Well, just for that, I'm going to read a poem called The Old Women. There were days I used to think of young ones. That's a lie, I still do. These are very particular old women. The old women that I knew or met or saw in very small offbeat villages in Mexico or in parts of Italy, north and south. So these are the old women I want to talk about to you. I like old women in black shawls who sit quietly against the wall of the house late afternoons, warming themselves in the sun, watching the hens strut in the dirt yard. Old women in the early mist off the river who scrub their clothes against stones that are as familiar and worn as their own hands. The old women who smile at men when being introduced, covering their mouths like shy girls because they have few teeth or none. Serious old women who have lived in the same place all their lives and lie down stiffly at night, hearing a screech owl gossip from the chestnut tree that someone was passing in the shadows by the moonlit road, as if they had never heard it called them before, spreading the news they had always known. I was going to say that wasn't so hot, was it? Oh, I'm going to read a small story. When Mrs. McCausland comes to mind, she slips through a gap in oblivion and walks down her front steps. In her hand, a small red velvet pillow she tucks under the head of old Jim Schreiber, who is lying dead drunk against the curb of busy Market Street. Then she turns, labors up the steps, and is gone. A small story, or rather the memory of a story I heard as a boy. The witnesses are not to be found. The steps lead nowhere. The pillow has collapsed into a thread of dust. Do the dead come back only to remind us they too were once among the living? And that the story we make of our lives is a mystery of luminous but uncertain moments, a shuffle of images we carry towards sleep. Mrs. McCausland with her velvet pillow, old Jim at peace, a story like a small clearing in the woods at night, seen from the windows of a passing train. Megan asked me to read a particular poem, requested it, and I thought I'd better agree, or she'd give me a bad intro. Actually, she talked about gestures, and I think she asked about this poem because it is a gesture. We're curious when Americans mostly say goodbye, they wave, and it's sort of like trying to erase the board. Or they're crying for attention, like saying help. I better get rid of somebody. This is a very Italian gesture. It's called the train station of Milan. Leaving Milan, what I remember is the old man in a blue cap who stood apart from the press of travelers, waving goodbye as if bereft. In the failing light of that winter day, framed by the great vault of the station and growing smaller in the distance. He seemed already blurred with time. I was young then, with few cares and a suitcase full of destinations. I gave him little thought in passing. The old man surely is dead now, and I am of the age he was when I first saw him as I see him now. The winter afternoon in Milan, his hand extended, palm up, his fingers opening and closing, as if he were setting free something he held, if only for a moment, then beckoning it to come back. I have an uncle, had an uncle. He practically was my elder brother in many ways. His name was Elmo Castelnuovo. And he lived with my grandmother, my mother, and I. And he took care of me, sort of, which meant he gave me breadsticks soaked in wine as a sedative, taught me the Dutch rub when I got older, until I cried. And when I worked with him in the foundry as a teenager, because it was so hot, he gave me my first chew of tobacco, whereas I promptly threw up by the Bessemer converter and humiliated myself in front of the entire factory. But I loved him. This poem is in 3 separate parts, and I'll simply pause between as we move in time, really. Lines written for Elmo Castelnuovo, and there's an epigraph from the Dutch poet Rutger Copeland. It's not time that passes, it's you, it's I. In winter, by late afternoon, it's almost dark when you come home from the mine. I hear the front gate creak and the metallic clink of your pail before you round the corner by the back steps where I've been waiting. In the sharp chill of the air, the mineral undercurrent of damp earth and shale comes with you. You turn down the collar of your shirt and let water from the pump pour down your face and nape. The skin above your undershirt pale as the crescent moon visible above the darker mass of the hills. You drive for hours, heading nowhere. You walk the streets at night and argue with the moon. Something hidden and manic in you emerged, almost unnoticed, until at last you huddled homeless and bewildered under a pile of coats in an alleyway no wider than the ones you entered as a young man. The rat scuttling in the garbage bin, the cat stalking the rat. Did they become your familiars? And the passers-by who glanced at you and hurried on their way, Did they believe you were invisible? Did the tag knotted to your toe say nameless? What I loved was the touch of your calloused hand on my head, the coal-rimmed hollows of your eyes. If you return now from the sooty underworld in which you dwell, you would not recognize me. The gate is gone, the house and those who lived in it are hidden elsewhere. Come back. Only the crescent moon and darkling hills are as you left them. Come back as you were, if only for a moment. I'm waiting by the back steps. The kitchen window casts its light. At the laden table, the absent prepare for your arrival. You will be hungry and tired, as in those years through which our lives passed. Thank you. I could read a long time, folks. I'm going to read this poem. A good many years ago, the Fresno Zoo was a relatively primitive one. And they had a wolf there in a cage. And I think I first understood what Joseph Conrad meant when he said the fascination of the abominable. I didn't know it extended that wide. But this is an elegy for a gray wolf. The gray wolf, over the years, had become demented, trotting from one corner of his cage to another without pause or rest. I used to visit him on quiet afternoons, drawn to his cage, yet appalled to bear witness to his blind, unbearable rush. I can't tell you if a wolf despairs, or if an urgency of the spirit can howl in silence until it stuns the hammering heart into oblivion. But he lived among passers-by, an exhibit and a curiosity. I speak here of a gray wolf, bewildered and lost in his own wilderness, who ran as long and as far as he could before he reached that place from which he started and to which he had returned, still heading toward what he may have remembered. Part of this poem I stole. You won't recognize it, but I did steal it. You know, you sometimes do that. Sure, Barry can tell you that. This is a poem called I Thought. I thought I had traveled beyond the range of the human eye or the ear's measure. But no, there was my house standing where it always stood, and the pot of red geraniums. I thought I would find something wondrous and strange that I had never seen. But no, it was the bird lady rounding the corner with her sack of stale loaves. I thought when I opened my door and called, "Is anyone home?" I heard a voice I faintly recognized or remembered from a dream I had. But no, it was only the old, implacable din of silence waiting for me to enter and replenish its empty bowl. Fiddle music's a lot more fun, isn't it? Different. Yeah. In that case, I'm going to read a poem I really like. No, I'm kidding. I like the other ones. Damn fool if I didn't. A poem called Rain. It's an older poem. Toward evening, as the light failed and the pear tree at my window darkened, I put down my book and stood at the open door. The first raindrops gusting in the eaves, a smell of wet clay in the wind. 60 years ago, lying beside my father, half asleep on a bed of pine boughs as rain drummed against our tent, I heard for the first time a loon's sudden wail drifting across that remote lake, a loneliness like no other. Though what I heard as inconsolable may have been only the sound of something untamed and nameless, singing itself to the wilderness around it and to us until we slept. And thinking of my father and of good companions gone into oblivion, I heard the steady sound of rain and the soft lapping of water, and did not know whether it was grief or joy or something other that surged against my heart and held me listening there so long and late. Not too long ago, I had a physical problem, ended up in the doctor. And he told me that I had a deep vein thrombosis. First, it sounded like a band. I didn't know what the hell. Like a garage band would say, yeah, we got a, it's called a deep vein thrombosis. So anyway, he sent me over for a scan, called a Doppler scan. And yes, you see those submarine movies where they send out a signal and get an echo back. It goes ping, ping, ping. Well, this one didn't go ping, ping, ping. It made images, but it also made sounds. And so this poem came with it. Doppler scan, deep vein thrombosis. The only funny thing about this damn poem. This morning, a man passed his silver wand along the length of my leg and conjured images that shone on a screen only he could see. But in the quietness of that room, I heard sounds like a bass drum measuring a march, and some like rivulets running among stones, a small beast scuttling through autumn leaves, a wind shoving lightly reeds by a pond. I don't know why I'm trying so hard to find pastoral improvisations on a theme retrieved from the ghostly wreckage of a leg that has endured so long and arduous a journey. Beauty is truth. Truth, beauty, said Keats, who was young and half in love with death. I'm neither, though what was beautiful to him awakes each day anew among the ruins. Cygnus, when old, looked up from a sacred grove and in a dazzle of white plumage flew skyward into the fires of his name, singing through the clear trumpet of his throat a song that one might choose to end on when that arrives. A swan song for the journey, like an echo, beautiful, and of love's deep sorrow singing. I should have told you the story of Cygnus, by the way. I don't know how many of you are familiar with it. Cygnus fell in love with the son of the sun god, Helios. And it was Helios who drove his chariot across the sky, chariot and horses, to make the sun come up and set. The boy thought he could handle his father's job, so one day he stole the damn thing and set out across the sky, lost control, tipped over, and the kid drowned, sort of like Icarus. Well, Cygnus was heartbroken all his life. Gods finally took pity on him and made him into a constellation, Cygnus the star, where you can still see him, sort of. I'm going to close by reading two poems with little comment between them, except to say this. The first poem I'm going to read, How It Is, was the first poem on the first page of my first book. And then I'm going to read a poem called How It Is later. And I don't think I have to say much between them. Before I do, I want to tell you I am very thankful that you've been here this evening. It's been a great pleasure. Listening to music, lovely evening, wonderful audience, and I thank all of you. How it is. This is how it is. One turns away and walks out into the evening. There is a white horse on the prairie, or a river that slips away among dark rocks. One speaks, or is about to speak, not that it matters. What matters is this. It is evening. I have been away a long time. Something is singing in the grass. How it is later. Something is singing in the grass, I wrote, years ago, in a poem that left unsaid what it was that sang. The grass now is parched. The white horse in the poem has gone to green pastures, yet something is singing still by my window. Some words keep to shadows or slip off in a bank of clouds, leaving but traces of themselves. Some we chisel into stone slabs to anchor our dead among the generations. And yet the dead return at evening with their tales and consolations and whisper us to sleep like a lullaby. We wake to the morning dove's soft call, the rooster's exaltations to the sun, each singing what was given it to sing, timeless, separate from our dominion, but of a world in which we share a rising chorus of ambiguous songs, even as we enter another day of our lives in the loneliness of how it is. I thank you. You realize I can't see a thing on it. I appreciate it very much. Thank you.